Groundswell, and welcome to another panel from the Wildlife Trust tent at Groundswell. We've had all kinds of amazing discussions and debates over the last 24 hours here at the Regenerative Farming Festival. And this next one will also be a fascinating addition to that. It's around supply chain partnerships. And we have a brilliant panel made up of representatives from Marks and Spencer, from Jordan Cereals, from Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, and from Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Northamptonshire Wildlife Trust. And we have the audience here in the tent as well. Just to say, all the discussions we're having here in the Wildlife Trust tent are being streamed on our YouTube channels and on LinkedIn and so on across the Wildlife Trusts. So for people here in the tent, just be aware that this is being filmed and put out there. So, for example, if you're sitting next to someone you shouldn't be sitting next to or whatever, then you might want to think about moving. But anyway, let me now welcome everyone. I'm Craig Bennett. I'm Chief Executive of the Wildlife Trust, and it's my real pleasure to introduce our panel here today. Right next to me, we have Helen Bailey, who's a land advisor with Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire Wildlife Trust. Then we have Anne Sawbridge, who's the Chief Executive of Jordan Cereals. Welcome, you guys. Then we have Chloe Edwards, who's the Director of Nature Recovery at Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust. And then we have Lucinda Langton, who's Head of Sustainability at M&S Food. So, welcome everyone, and what we're going to try to do is explore during this panel discussion those partnerships between NGOs and supply chains and farmers as well. Well, I'll talk to the panel a little bit, and then I'll come out to the audience for you to ask some questions as well, so you might want to think about the questions you want to ask in all this as well. I'm going to start, if I can, with you, Anne, as Chief Executive of Jordan Cereals. And I love Jordan Cereals, I have to say, particularly like the Super Berry Granola.
Excellent.
It's a particularly good one. Love that one. But Anne, we've had a brilliant partnership between the Wildlife Trust and Jordan Cereals for many years called the Jordan's Farm Partnership. Maybe you could explain to everyone how that works, what it involves, and also briefly, what sort of outcomes have you seen for farmers and for nature as a result of it?
Thank you, Craig. So the Jordan's Farm Partnership is what we call the Jordan's Nature-Friendly Farm Programme. In a nutshell, it started out in 2015, so it's actually in its 10th year now, so it has a real longevity since its inception. And the partners in the programme are ourselves as the commercial partner, the Wildlife Trust, a really key partner, LEAF, and of course our farmers. And the aim of the programme has been from the start really focused on biodiversity on the farms where we buy our oats, and nature recovery, and I suppose more recently we've been also adopting more regenerative farming approaches across our farms. I think what makes this partnership unique is, first of all, it is 10 years old, so we've got a lot of history in it, is actually the partnership with the Wildlife Trust in particular, and that's because some of the outcomes are quite remarkable from the partnership. So the main aim of the partnership, it started to have we wanted a minimum of 10% of the farmland set aside for nature-friendly farming, healthy habitats, etc. And actually, we are achieving almost an average of 25% of the land set aside across the farmers where we buy our Jordan's oats. And so you ask yourself, and that's a land mass of about over 4,000 hectares, which is now actively managed across our Jordan's Farm partners for nature recovery. And we sort of ask...
And it's worth saying, it's worth saying quickly that your Jordan's Farms, we're here at Groundswell, we're pretty much in the middle of the Jordan's region, aren't we?
Right in the middle, right in the middle of the region. So we make Jordan's at Biggleswade, and most of our farmers are within 40 miles of there. So yes, we're right in the heartland. But I think what's been really critical is we're really proving, within the partnership approach, what's possible within a medium-scale functioning supply chain. And I think it is a beacon of hope for what we could achieve. And when when we think about, well, why is it successful? Actually, I think the partnership with the Wildlife Trust in particular, and the role that the farm advise, that the advisors play in creating individual land management plans with each of our farmers. So all of our farmers are in the partnership. That's about 33 farms. I think we're working with 14 different wildlife trusts, advisory trusts across the partnership. And, at the outset, those advisors have an awful lot of local knowledge, because if we want to create if we want nature to be back in recovery, it really is field by field, farm by farm, and there's nothing similar when you get down to that granular level. And I think one of the reasons the partnership works is because we are working with experienced advisors, creating land management plans that are bespoke to those farms, and working with the farmers to understand how to use some of the most unproductive land, for instance, on those farms, and how to make it work for healthy habitats. So that's some of the some of the results that we've seen.
And we've seen such an improvement, haven't we, for farmland birds over that area. Actually, you go to these farms and they're then beautifully noisy in terms of the abundance of birds and insects on them.
Absolutely, and nature is the real winner,
yeah.
And wildlife in particular. So we do focus on some of the conservation species, and when I talk to farmers, there's nothing they delight more in telling me the sorts of species that they are seeing back on their farms. I guess the bees and the pollinating insects are the primary, because they're so important to the whole food system. But bats, brown hares, barn owls. I'm reading yellowhammers. We have an impact report here for the partnership if anybody is interested. But we are really seeing how well-managed hedgerows, well-managed field margins are really helping to bring back life, bursting with nature in our fields. And we've always believed that healthy food comes from healthy habitats and healthy farmlands, and that's what we've been supporting in the Jordan's Farm Partnership now for 10 years. And as I say, there's a model there that's working, and one which we're very happy to share. And a lot of learning there, more trials taking place, as I say, more regenerative farming practices now being adopted on those farms, and I think both farmers and nature are seeing the benefit of that.
I think what's been amazing, Anne, is just the long-term nature of it. As you say, now going for a decade, we've been able to really see the benefits for it. And as you say, actually getting to, at a time when internationally we have these commitments of trying to get to 30% of our land, inland waters and sea in recovery for nature by 2030, and there's some sort of doomsters say, oh, that can't be done, but actually here getting to around 25% in a heavily farmed commercial landscape, it's really impressive as to what can be done. And you've got those long-term relationships with your farmers and so on as well.
And that's what I think it's about. And you're right, it is definitely a proof point, and as I say, a beacon of hope for what is possible, because it's actually happening. Yeah. And I think it works because of the multi-stakeholder partnership approach. One of our other partners is Leaf. And Leaf provide the sort of whole farm standard, management standard, which also helps us to measure the output of the programme. So it's a combination, a commercial partner like us, and some of our, the longevity of it. We don't have a lot of churn in the farmers who are in the partnership, because actually it is working for them. Now we're very lucky because we are working with a group of farmers who are as passionate as we are about conserving nature. And actually many of them were previously involved in the development of the conservation grade scheme, which the Jordan's brothers, Bill and David Jordan, if any of you from this region will know well, who founded Jordan's. They created that back in 1985, and this is really, I guess, the next level of that approach. But yes, the farmers we've been working with, we have long-term relationships with them. They have long-term relationships with us. It provides some security for them. Some of them, like to know. We like to know where our oats come from, but they also like to know where their oats go. And I think having a commercial partner committed for the long term on a program like this is, critical also.
So we do love this partnership between Jordan's and the Wildlife Trusts. We love what it does for nature. We love the working together, what it does for farmers. I have to say, I also love it because I got a Greg Wallace-style trip to your factory, which I massively enjoyed, and particularly the goodie bag you sent me away with. So thank you very much for that.
Everybody is welcome to Jordan's.
Yeah.
It's actually only down the road in Biggleswade, so it'll take you less than 20 minutes to get to.
It was fantastic. All right, well, Anne, thank you very much. More questions for you later. But next to Lucinda, if I can, please, Head of Sustainability at Marks and Spencer. And we have a partnership also between the Wildlife Trust and Marks and Spencer, the Farming with Nature programme. And so maybe you can tell everyone a little bit more about that, Lucinda, how that works, and again, what's the impact it's had?
Of course. I mean, I thought ours has been going for a while, but it certainly hasn't been going a decade. So we're slightly the newcomers on the block here. But Farming with Nature, we set it up in 2021 with the primary aim of building resilience with our farmers in our UK supply base, recognising the challenges of climate change, but also the importance of addressing the nature crisis and that sort of thing. So those are the primary goals. And to do that, what we did was we requested all of our farms work and are leaf mark accredited, but also complete 2 M&S specific modules around landscape and nature. And landscape and nature, the big objective there is asking our farmers to set aside between 5 and 10% of their land for nature. And the other module around integrated pest management, so using beneficial insects. And the work that we've done then is in the second pillar of the programme, which is actually then saying, well, we recognise we're asking a lot of our farmers, how do we help them on this journey? And that's where the Wildlife Trust has come in, because together with the Wildlife Trust, we've created 7 grower groups across the UK where all our growers, any grower, I think we're the only retailer to do this, any grower that grows for M&S is welcome to turn up to those grower events and learn and be educated by some of the UK's experts in integrated pest management, landscape, nature, and we've just done a whole series of events on water over the last summer. So hosted by the Wildlife Trusts with Wildlife Trusts and other experts. So they've been absolutely brilliant. And then the third pillar, and very much recognised, I think, by farmers and welcomed by farmers. So in terms of one of the outputs, I think we've had some really great feedback. And in terms of the first, if you like, pillar, we've now set aside, because we've got about 400 suppliers, some farmers in the programme, about 10,000 hectares of land set aside for nature in the M&S supply chain. And then the third pillar is really around innovation, which we've worked really less with the Wildlife Trust on, but clearly also helping to bring new innovation to. And mainly, actually, that's been focused around measurement. And how do we measure nature? How do we measure biodiversity? And how do we help farmers know if the work that they're doing is making a difference? Whether that's in terms of things like Land App, whether it's in things like agri-sound. So we've rolled out pollinator. This is the coolest technology ever. It recognises and measures the wing beats of pollinators. So we've been able to understand whether farmers can understand, by having a little agri-sound box, they can understand whether the work they did in planting that herbal ley or setting more land aside has actually increased pollinator numbers. It's very cool. And we've now rolled that out to a further 18 farms, so it's now about 20 farms across the UK. And again, so innovation really to measure and to help farmers measure and monitor the biodiversity on their land.
And it's probably too early yet, isn't it, to be able to see what the trends are in that? You've been going for sort of 3 years. Are you getting much data on that yet, or is it?
I think what we see with nature metrics generally is that you need this longer term measurement, because you can have a really cold spell and you can measure pollinators and they can be right down, and then you could have a really hot spell the next year and numbers could be completely different. So you need long term trends, probably over a decade. So I suspect if Anne were to do it, she'd probably have much better results.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully.
But what's the feedback you're getting from your supply chain in this? I mean, how's it going down with farmers?
Generally really, really well. I think people recognise that what we're trying to bring is expertise and support people. And I think where I get to often is that because I'm married to a farmer, and what he's often said to me is, we've all had agronomists for years, but what we really need now is an ecologist. Every farm needs an ecologist, and I think that's what the programme I think is bringing to M&S farmers, that they've got access to brilliant wildlife and ecology expertise when they want it through the partnership, through M&S, through our grower hub. So we've got I guess the other part of the programme is that we do have this grower hub online. We know that 400 or 500 we've had 400 or 500 people use that hub, so we know it's being used. Those are separate sort of logins. So some of them will be M&S, I agree, but not 400 of them. So we know that the farmers and growers are using that hub. So yes, I think they're benefiting from the advice, and generally we've had very positive feedback. And the other thing, in terms of actual impact, we've had discussions about, well, what land can we include? Can we include drainage ditches in Lincolnshire as part of our 5%? And I sort of turned around and said, well, I guess, what do you think? And I think, Emma, we were on the visit, and then this barn owl got up from the drainage ditch and sort of flew, and I was like, well, I think that's probably a yes, isn't it? So I think, we've had these discussions, but clearly they are making a difference. Even in a year or two, you can see the difference from a wildlife perspective on the farms.
Great, fantastic. I think maybe wildlife does that in Lincolnshire. I was there not so long back, and I was being interviewed by a journalist, and I was talking about how sight was important for cuckoos, and the moment I finished the sentence, a cuckoo piped up, and I'm convinced they thought we just put a speaker in the woods or something. But anyway, but great to sort of make that comment about how farmers saying we need to sort of move from agronomists to ecologists almost. That sets us up nicely for me to come to you, Chloe, as Director of Nature Recovery at Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust. Can you explain a little bit of the land advice that's given to growers and how you work with growers to provide this kind of advice?
Of course. So I think a lot of it leans towards, as Anne was saying, about the long-term relationship. It's really enabled us to have that local farm advisor in place, consistently being able to build relationships with the farmers in our area. And largely this is kind of one-on-one advice, and we'll go in and we'll just listen, really, in the first instance, and understand how the farm operates and what there is. One of the most frequent asks we get as wildlife trusts when working with farmers is, what do I have, and can you tell me what I can do to make it better? So that's always our kind of first step, seeing what's there, identifying then what actions could be implemented or enabled to improve those habitats that might be on the site. Largely the farms we're working with are large arable operations, but they might have, a little bit of woodland here, a little bit of permanent pasture there as well. And particularly we're looking at the connectivity over those big arable areas, so looking at where we've got natural connections made by hedgerows, rivers, ditches, even tracks, and where those could be enhanced or improved, where there might be opportunities for broader habitat creation, where there might be an interest around specific species, that we could do specific species-related interventions. And then a massive part of our role is also trying to enable those things to happen. So looking at funding opportunities and signposting, supporting in funding applications if that's appropriate, and really trying to be able to lift farmers up to be able to deliver stuff, because we've got the resource and the expertise to help. And they might not necessarily have the time to do that themselves. So that's really important. But yeah, having that kind of consistent person on the ground with that local knowledge really, really makes the difference, because they've got that trusted relationship, ongoing dialogue. We have sort of multiple contact throughout the year and an annual review, looking at how things have gone, what's gone well, what's not. Lots of opportunity to try things and fail, and learn great stuff and share that. And the kind of local piece with the local advisor is really great as well, because they're not just visiting one farm, and they've got that kind of overview of what's happening in the wider landscape. So lots of the things we can suggest could be done on the farm can link to neighbouring farms. So again, we're building that landscape resilience and connectivity for nature and farming too.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. Well, I mean, you're talking there about those land advisors, and we have one here. Helen Bailey is a land advisor with Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire Wildlife Trusts. How long have you been doing that, Helen? And, what's it like going onto a farm for the first time as a land advisor, but, as a wildlife trust, when perhaps farmers are more used to agronomists and so on? How do you build that relationship? How do you go about it and understand what the farmer needs and how to provide that advice?
So I've been a land advisor with in Cambridgeshire for the last 3 years. I was working as a restoration officer on a big landscape scale project before that, so I've got that sort of background of nature and what's required. Initially, when you go to visit a farm, usually I find that they come to me first because they want some advice on something, and then it often expands into something bigger. And they're always very proud of what they've got already, but don't necessarily know how to protect what they've got. So my first visit is really about building trust, going and talking to the farmer, finding out and listening to what their needs are as well, because obviously whatever we suggest, it's got to fit in with the farm business. So it's no good me telling them that, you know, you've got to do this or you have to do that, and because they probably wouldn't take that very kindly. They want to sort of have a discussion about what will work for them. So we quite often go out and have a look at the farm. It's very important just to have a look at the landscape, see what's there. I can provide sort of advice of what they might want to do. They might not accept that advice, but they can take little bits, snippets. We'll usually go back to the farm and just sort of have a look at maps and just see what would work, looking at those odd field corners that they can take out because they're not very productive, so maybe they could set that aside for nature. Sometimes ponds, they can fit ponds in, and they really like having ponds. And also sort of things like how they can best manage their hedgerows as well, and what works for the bird species they have there. So what I'll do then is I'll go away and write them a short report that they can take bits out of. They can take whatever bits work for them, giving suggestions on how best to manage certain aspects of their farm. It's just really about advice, and then building that trust. I think that's really important. It's got to be something that works for them.
You've got to build that relationship around the kitchen table and so on, and maintain that consistency.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
And you get to know those farms intimately, and you have your patch. So how many farms, out of interest, are you now personally involved in giving advice to?
So because I work as part of the Jordan's Farm Partnership, I advise 3 of the farmers there. So every year I go out and review their farms. It's not about telling them off about things that haven't gone right. Definitely don't do any of that. So we just go out and just have a look, see how things are going, and if they need any advice on anything. Aside from the Jordan's farms, we advise on other things, other land managers. It's not necessarily growers. Sometimes they even might be smallholders who haven't got a lot of land, but they still require that advice. And I would say it's growing every year. There seems to be more and more demand. I'm working with the farm cluster as well, which we've got over 30 farmers that are involved in that, and other growers and land managers. So it's getting bigger and bigger each year.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Helen. So what's I think very interesting here is we've heard about a particular couple of partnerships here from M&S and from Jordan's with the Wildlife Trust. But it'd be interesting to hear from Marks and Spencer and from Jordan Cereals about whether you've got other sort of similar partnerships in other areas of your supply chain. Should we start with you, Lucinda, first, about from Marks and Spencer's point of view?
So yes, we have many similar partnerships indeed. We can't really do anything on sustainability without partnerships, but probably less nature focused in the same way. We have a big partnership now called Farm for the Future with Harper Adams, which is where which is more carbon focused. Really, it's about livestock farming. So, but nature is clearly a part of it. We've chosen 7 different farms from across our livestock supply chain. And really, it's about working out how we work to decarbonise. What's the cutting-edge technologies to decarbonise those supply chains, which we know are really critical to meeting net zero and meeting our net zero target. But how do we what are nature-based solutions that will come in as part of that? So that's, if you like, more of an academic partnership. And then another very different type of partnership is possibly, again, it's about helping farmers, working with farmers, but working with farmers from the developing world. So, for example, at the moment, every cup of coffee and you buy in an M&S cafe or tea, we donate a penny to our charity partnership with Emerging Leaders, and they are then delivering training to farmers on the ground and so far we've done trainings in Peru, Brazil, and Malawi, and we're about to launch one in Kenya to support farmers in the face of climate change to start to do to build mitigation strategies and to build resilience. So, we've got some brilliant sort of commercial stories coming through. So it's kind of, again, helping farmers, but in a slightly different way, and nature, again, be part of that. But they're not sort of so biodiversity and sort of as we have with the World Justice Trust, but, you can see that we have to flex in terms of the way we partner to achieve similar outcomes.
And I think it's really important, that point you make, that it's really hard to deliver anything in sustainability unless you do it through the kind of partnerships. And what about you at Jordan's Cereals, beyond Jordan's Farm Partnership?
So we've taken some of the learnings from the approaches to nature in the UK to some of our other supply chains. So one example would be Brazil nuts, where they come from the Bolivian Amazon forest, actually. So we have a project running in Bolivia because that is it's a vulnerable area. We're working with 150 different families across 15 communities there to help them with seedlings. I think we've planted 35,000 seedlings of Brazil nut trees there, and we're also working with the communities themselves and helping with education, etc. for those, because those communities are also quite vulnerable. So that's one example, and we also support the Seeds for Bees program for almonds. Almond trees in California, because again that is a sort of not a friendly landscape for the bees and the pollinators, and so that program seeks to support the planting of wildlife in between, in sort of rows in between the almond trees, really to try to get healthier pollination on an ongoing basis for almond growing. So those would be two examples of what we're doing outside of the UK.
Great, thanks so much, Anne. So I'll come back to both Helen and Chloe now. I mean, as we're all aware, that over the last year or so, there's been at times a really unhelpful debate in parts of the UK about that, by some commentators try to suggest it's kind of food versus nature, and we've got to choose one or the other. I rather suspect that anyone that's at Groundswell kind of thinks that's a false dichotomy, otherwise you wouldn't really be here. But let's plough into it a little bit more. I'll come to you, Helen. Particularly interested in when you're giving advice to farmers on the ground, what's clearly the advice you're giving is good for nature, but I mean, how do you see it as being good for the farm as well, and for food production? How do you see those going hand in hand?
Can you hear me? Yeah. For starters, we sort of look at the benefits that wildlife will bring to the farm. So whether that's pollinators looking after, the meadows, so that there's more diversity in the meadows, looking at how that can be improved for pollinators, and then of course pollinators will benefit the crops as well, and also looking at things like species that will predate on pests, and how that can benefit both sides, both nature and the farmer. There's also another aspect is I think for the farmer is that, because there's just such a bad press about how bad farmers are, what they're doing wrong. But there's a lot that really do want to do right. And if they can be seen to be doing things that are good for nature, then it benefits them as well socially, for society as well. So I think if we can sort of involve both sides of the coin, so to speak, then it's sort of win-win for the farmers really, and for nature.
Great, thank you. And Chloe, how do you see it from your perspective on this? I mean, you'll be aware of this kind of pushback that's happened in some places, but on the ground, are you hearing from farmers that actually this advice on nature can benefit them from a food production point of view as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's testament, as you say, how many people are here. Everyone gets it. There are obviously those polarised debates still ongoing, but largely, I think farmers are really, really receptive to the opportunity for nature recovery across the farm landscape, and it is the opportunity that we've got to pursue. In Hertfordshire, there's 90,000 hectares of arable farmed areas. That's half of our county. So if we want to ever get towards 30% of land looked after for nature, which is going to underpin food resilience and all of our landscape resilience as well. We've got a body of work to do there, but I think there's absolutely the appetite there, and it seems to, year by year just be increasing. So yeah, there's still those debates ongoing, but I think largely we're moving in the right direction, which is really great to see.
I'd like to come in on that point, because I think that programs like the Jordan's Farm Partnership and like the M&S program, are proving that actually you don't need to make that choice. And from our perspective, conservation farming has been part of how Jordan's oats have been grown right from the very start. And these are commercial farms, so it's commercially viable if you have the right partners involved. And I think all of our farmers that we work with would say that it's not a choice anymore, and it's certainly not a trade-off. And this model is proving that you can have a medium-sized operating supply chain, which is commercially viable, which really has nature at its heart and nature recovery as a key priority. So I think it's a huge learning curve, and I know there's much more that we all need to know about the how, but I think there are examples and real life examples out there that we can all point to that is proving that case.
Great. Do you want to add anything on this point specifically, Lucinda?
No, full agreement.
Full agreement, yeah, great. Thank you. Final question to particularly Anne and Lucinda before I come out to the audience is actually just about carbon as well, and carbon in the supply chains. A lot of attention on that, of course, in recent years. Maybe Lucinda, you can tell us a bit more. How are you viewing carbon in these supply chains, and all those discussions about carbon insetting or offsetting and so on, and how does that all relate to nature in the supply chains?
Sure. So at M&S we've set a target to be net zero by 2040, which is across our entire value chain, if you like, of which and 80% of that really comes from agriculture, or agricultural related inputs. So we know we've got to work in agriculture, and I think our initial view has been to start to work closely with our farmers and very often with our suppliers, and sometimes we work, depending on the supply chain, directly with the farmer who is our direct supplier, and sometimes it's through an intermediary, whether it's a manufacturer or whatever. But we're lucky in that we do have very close partnerships, and we've gone out and we set expectations. So we want to come on this journey. We've got roadmaps, decarbonisation roadmaps, as I was saying, for our 6 major species. And as part of that, I think what we're really looking to do at the moment is work with those farmers and growers to decarbonise, to help them decarbonise their own business. I think insetting is a really difficult word at the moment for us. Obviously working to reduce carbon in our supply chain to a certain degree is insetting, but I think what I suspect you're trying to be getting at with that word is the sort of trading of carbon and carbon schemes. And I think at the moment we don't think that we know enough, that we wouldn't want to offer any guidance to anyone to say you must set this land aside for this amount and you should sell that carbon, because the reality is what we want to do at the end of the day is buy low carbon food from our suppliers and have that flowing through our systems and being able to account for that when we say, well, we've reduced carbon together with our suppliers across our supply chain by 2040. So I think that's kind of where we are on it, just working, if you like, project by project, farm by farm. And again, we know there's carbon reduction in some of the work that we've been doing on farms with nature-based solutions. I think the trick is quantifying it, and I think that's probably the next stage for us, and how we do that. Again, discussions with Leaf and others, but I think that's still the million-dollar question sometimes. Great,
thank you very much. And Anne, around on the carbon question?
Yeah, carbon is obviously hugely important to us too, and we have made carbon commitments, and we're on track to meet our Courtauld commitment, which was 50% reduction by 2030 from a baseline of 2015. And I guess through our direct operations, we're already reduced by 35%. So we know we have a roadmap to hit that commitment, and that's the footprint that we have control over. What we do know is we've done some work on sort of scope 3, is that 88% of our carbon emissions come from our scope 3, which is operations outside of our control. So it does make sense for us to to work on what we can work on. However, 1/3 of those Scope 3 do come from the farms. They come from the oat farming side of things. And one of the things that, and we do hope that, and we know that our farmers are working on, lower carbon techniques on their soils, but we are also working on a small trial with 5 of our Jordan's farmers with downforce technologies, where we're doing some imaging of carbon in the soil. It's a 6-year program, and we're hoping to learn how it is that some of the regenerative farming techniques within the program are actually helping to reduce carbon, or in fact capture more carbon in the soil. So there's a lot more to learn, and I think, I agree with Lucinda. I think it is trial by trial, and it's trying to measure it. But certainly that is a pillar, one of the pillars of the programme that we are working on.
Great, thank you. Okay, so it's over to you. Any questions from people here in the Wildlife Trust tent? We have a gentleman at the back. Please wait for the microphone to come to you. There we go. Brilliant. And if just say who you are, maybe.
Yep. Hi, Pablo, a consultant on food sustainability. I wonder if the lady from Jordan's and Marks and Spencer's could talk about the economic incentives of being part of such partnerships, specifically this one that you are presenting today, and maybe also the financial benefits across the supply chain. So I guess, well, there is the one for the Wildlife Trust. I guess you get some payments, for the extension services that you're providing. Then do the farmers get a premium, or is the stability of being able to sell their product the selling point for them? And then what will be the incentives also financially for the brand and the retailer? Over.
Yeah, great question. Go on, Anne. Yeah, you've got the mic.
I'm happy to answer that. On behalf, what we do. Yes, we pay a premium to our farmers to farm according to the standards within the Jordan's Farm Partnership, which is around biodiversity requirements and lands set aside to nature. So that forms an income stream, sits alongside other income streams available for biodiversity actions and land management programs that are available. So, we recognise that it's not easy, and so that's how we work it. I mean, from our brand value point of view, the value to us is in working with farmers who hold the same values that we do as a brand. I mean, everything that we make and sell comes from nature. It starts in the soil. And so for us, it's the knowledge of where those oats come from and the value into the brand around sustainability. Consumers aren't always... I mean, the harsh reality is that that's probably not the most important thing in the consumer's minds right now when they're buying products. So we have to work hard because there needs to be value right the way through the chain for this to work. And, that is hard. But, there are many consumers out there. And I think, an event like this where you see the younger generation as well, it's so clear that this is a movement. Conscious consumerism is coming our way from the younger generation, and brands like us hopefully will be able to reap further rewards from that as we move forward.
Brilliant, thank you. Lucinda, what would you say on this?
So from our perspective, I mean, the commercials will be different, crop by crop, farm by farm, negotiation by negotiation, and that's the way it works. However, I would say that our farmers and the 410 farmers in our programme, we have some very, very long-term relationships with them. They're part of an M&S, if you like, family of farms, and there have been, we've worked with, Hunter Pack, for example, who supplies with root veg for 45 years. I mean, this isn't a sort of flash-in-the-pan trading arrangement. This is a long-term, stable, which allows both sides to invest. And what we understand is that there are times where, that they get value from what we're offering in terms of this additional advice, and that's an additional, if you like, benefit of being in the M&S supply chain. In terms of brand value for us, we know that quality is what people come to M&S for. So yes, we always pay a premium for quality, but at the same time, it allows us to give us that point of differentiation, which is why people come to M&S and not cross the street to go. Well, it's why they cross the street to come to us, rather. And because of that quality, and because we know quality and sustainability are intrinsically linked in the minds of the consumers, you can see that, it means that they are prepared to pay that little bit more. So one of the best lines we had and still have now in the food hall is our sourdough dough bread made with Wild Farm flour, for which obviously we paid the Wild Farm premium, and it flies off the shelves. And then once you put the marketing behind that, the Tom Kerridge series, etc., that we run every summer, we've been running it for the last couple of summers, and the farm to food hall, like bringing that alive for customers, I think really helps sort of tell the story and drives the sales. So yes.
And it's interesting, it's about telling the story, isn't it, as opposed to shouting facts at the consumer.
And this year, little spoiler, I know everyone is going to be wondering whether to switch the telly on July the 4th, but I can say you should switch the television on, because we did this partnership, obviously, with Tom Kerridge around Farm to Food Hall. We've got more Farm to Food Hall ads airing at the moment, but at the same time, we're also doing a new series called Tom Kerridge Cooks Britain. So he's going all over the UK, sponsored by us, to sort of really get in and cook food on a farm. And I think that's what brings it to life. That tells the stories of farmers. And that actually, when you say, if I've had any complaints about the programme, it's like, you're not telling our stories enough. Now we are. So I hope it'll be all right. Tune in, July the 4th. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, we're going to have some more questions in a moment, but I do know, to the rest of the panel, but I do know Lucinda has to head off in about 30 seconds, basically, to go to be on another panel. So it looks like you want to say something else. No, I don't want to say anything.
So, okay.
Thank you for having me.
So I just want to say, look, can we please give a big round of applause for Lucinda for joining us from Marks and Spencer. Thank you. Thanks. I did promise her we'd let her go at 2:45, so there we go. So next question, please. And Lucinda, thanks so much. Yeah, really appreciate it. Rob, and say who you are, please.
Yeah, Rob Stoneman, I'm Director of Landscape Recovery from the Wildlife Trust. So, I mean, there's some brilliant examples here, and obviously delighted to see them, and obviously from a Wildlife Trust perspective, delighted to be part of that. But obviously, out there in the agricultural landscape, things aren't getting better. In general, they're getting worse. So we're seeing things like the apple crop beginning to fail in Kent because of a lack of pollinating insects, freshwater pollution getting worse, mainly driven by agriculture, not sewage pollution, which is quite interesting because it's not what you see on the news. And 1 in 6 species are at risk of extinction in the UK. And agriculture is the driver of most of that decline. So that's the reality that we face. And I wonder, to all of you, do you see regulation of agriculture part of the driver towards that solution, or is it that the supply chain can actually drag agriculture through to a sort of much more regenerative future? What's going to really change the dial? Because the dial isn't changing at the moment; it's going in the wrong direction.
Anne, yeah.
I think it's a multi-stakeholder approach. I think the food system, if we call it food system, has to provide a pull. I think that sustainability. I think that sustainability of programs like the Jordan's Farm Partnership, the M&S program, I think Sainsbury's have a program. They are acting as a pull, and I think when the Jordan's Farm Partnership was sort of out on its own for a good number of years, and we're actually delighted to see other big brands operating at scale, a bigger scale than we can, coming on board with some of these same types of programs to encourage nature recovery and regeneration. I'm probably not qualified to talk about regulation and whether that would really work. I mean, regulation does work. We've seen it work in other areas. However, I think there's a majority, there's a large proportion of farmers out there, and young farmers, who want to do better for nature. And I think we can see it in the scale of this event. I was here last year, there were less people. I know there were a lot less people here 3 years ago. And you sort of feel like we might be on the cusp of a bigger movement. But I'm quite sure the answer lies in a multi-stakeholder approach, but I think commercial partners like us have a big role to play. I think that we can help by sharing our stories. I think we can provide them some models that work, and that really help other brands and manufacturers like us come on board, and try to do and encourage the same sort of principles around how they farm.
Great, thank you. I'd be interested from Chloe and Helen what you see as some of the biggest levers that can be pulled here to drive sort of faster change more widely in agriculture.
Yeah. Oh, it's all about scaling up, isn't it? And I think we have some fantastic models here. A lot of them, although Lucinda mentioned some of the M&S stuff that does bring together farmers, groups of farmers, a lot of it is still kind of on that one-to-one basis. So there's fantastic stuff happening in different locations, but it's not really being pulled together in quite the right way yet. In many cases anyway. There is a lot of great stuff happening where we've got farmer clusters which really bring together people and catalyse that action at scale, which is absolutely what we need to actually drive that change. So I think there is an absolute role for evolving some of these partnerships to actually drive that change at scale across landscapes, and that's what I think that we need. So I think, there's an evolution here for sure.
Just listening to one of the talks earlier where they had actually done some research on what are farmers thinking, what are the big questions that some of the farmers have on this whole area. The biggest thing that came out was the impact on commercial viability or livelihoods was one, top of the list, and the second was the how-to. And I think it is the sort of programs in practice perhaps that can demonstrate or can help to provide those examples and reassurances that actually there are commercial models available, and that they do work. And some of the how-tos are tried and tested. Some of the how-tos are still being learned about. But I think the more that we can actually stand up and talk about what's actually happening, and the live examples, I think we need to get out there and talk about what's possible more, and get more people doing it at scale, as you say.
Yeah, great. And Helen, let me just come to you. I mean, one of the, I think we've got 200 farm advisors across the Wildlife Trust in total now, and you're sitting around the kitchen table having those kind of conversations. What's your sense of what are the levers that really work and drive some of the change that we're talking about here?
I think a lot of it, what I'm seeing is a lot of farmers are actually prepared to work together. So they haven't got a voice on their own, so they are looking to work with other farmers. They're quite open to that, even though quite often we hear about farmers sort of keeping themselves to themselves. But actually, I think...
You mean in clusters and so on?
Yeah, in cluster groups, yeah. So, I mean, I know some really innovative farmers that are looking to solutions themselves, working together. They might not be very big as a farm operation themselves, but if they're working with others, it makes them bigger together. So they're looking at things like local markets and sustainability, and just getting the message out to local people about what they're doing and how they're going about farming sustainably for local markets.
Great. It's worth reflecting. I think it's always interesting to reflect that in the environmental land management schemes in England, you obviously have the 3 tiers of sustainable farming incentive and the countryside stewardship, and then the landscape recovery. It's interesting that it's actually only the landscape recovery that is oversubscribed, with these huge numbers of farm clusters coming together, putting in for the big landscape recovery bids, and that's where you see, actually the real demand coming through most strongly. I think it's very interesting to see that. Let's just get a couple more questions before we finish. Just at the back, and then I'll...
Hello, Rory Harding from Kent Wildlife Trust. I wanted to just ask a bit more about the detail of the funding arrangement between Jordan's and the local Wildlife Trust for the land advice, because Kent Wildlife Trust is one of, has a few land advisors and farm cluster facilitators, and it's been incredible to see those relationships build between individuals on the ground and the farmers over the last 5 years that I've been at the trust. But it's continues to be a real challenge to to fund that consistent presence and that advice service. And yeah, I'm interested in that particular arrangement and other ideas for like a sustainable, employment of advisors for the long term.
Yeah, well, there's certainly someone sitting right next to you that you can talk to about that afterwards. That as we're starting to think how we build up our national offering around farm advice in the Wildlife Trust. But I don't know, Helen or Chloe, do you want to chip on that, or Anna, who wants to? How do we make sure this is sustainable to make sure we have lots of people like Helen, I guess? Well,
more people like all of you, I think would be. I mean, we support the Wildlife Trust. We put we have an arrangement with we have your logo on our packs, so we obviously pay a royalty to do that, and we support the wildlife advisors also. So there is a commercial agreement there. I think we need more partners. We need more partners on board, and I think again, getting these types of partnerships to work at scale is where, and I know Emma, you work hard in the sort of corporate relationship side of things, but anything we can do to help get more companies on board, because that's in our interest, because we're actually doing it because we believe we believe in nature recovery, and so anything we can do to further support that, we certainly will.
Chloe, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, just briefly, I think the big challenge with kind of retaining fantastic folks like Helen and colleagues that I have in my team is having that longevity of funding. So we quite often have quite short-term agreements around a lot of these things. And often that means that we get a bit panicky when they're coming to the end and we don't have that certainty that they're going to be extended. So I think having that long-term view and ability to push funding towards these things with, thinking 10 plus years at least around that is how we need to go going forwards.
Great, thank you. So this is exactly why we're building up the national offer around farm advice across the Wildlife Trusts. One more question here, I think. Got time for, and then there's a gentleman at the back. I'm very conscious. I want to just make sure it's not just colleagues from the Wildlife Trust asking questions. So, is it okay? Go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Angelica. I'm a beef farmer in Cambridge, and I'm one of the farmers in the cluster group that Helen organises. And so we're now called the East Cambridgeshire Regenerative Farmers, and I think there's quite a few of us together. And we realise that as individual farmers, we're maybe not so attractive to bigger supply chains. But I think it would be really useful, for example, and I'm sorry Lucinda has gone, that if we as clusters could provide local food that is identified as local through the supermarkets. And if we go through a sort of Wildlife Trust certification or help bringing us together, and we all learn so much from each other, we go and visit each other's farms, Helen organises talks, and I really think we could instead of these silly pictures that some supermarkets have of farmers that have not supplied them for years, we could actually create a supply chain of local farmers that work with nature for supermarkets.
Sure. No, I think it's a very interesting thought. There was a guy at the back there also with a question.
Hi there, I'm Sam Hurst from Norfolk Rivers Trust. I was just wondering how Jordan's and the Wildlife Trusts have sort of embedded the regenerative principles in the farmed land. You've talked about setting land aside for nature and improving the habitat, but how have you encouraged those regenerative principles on the farmed land for the oats or other parts of the produce?
Do you want to, Helen, or yeah?
Actually, I think it's come from the farmers themselves. They have a real desire, passion to do what's right, and they've seen the benefits of how looking after the soils, improves lots of things. So, start from the bottom, start with the soils, and build your way up. And I don't think I've really had to encourage that. It's come from them. So.
I think as well, our farms are also in the Leaf Mark programme, and the Leaf Mark standard encourages and we'll be doing more. I think we're all doing more to identify and encourage more regenerative farming techniques. But we know as well that it is coming from the farmers, and they're all learning from each other within the programme as well as to what works and how they can improve the resilience of the soil health, for instance.
Great. Any final word on it, Chloe, or you have?
No.
No. Okay, fine. That's absolutely fine. Well, I was going to say we have to wrap up, but I'll allow one more lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Gemma. I work at Accenture in Sustainability Consulting. Obviously some success stories. Are there any other retailers that are doing just as great work with the Wildlife Trust, and do you actively reach out to retailers to bring more of these partnerships to life?
I can see my colleague in the audience is probably the best person to answer that. Are you happy to answer that, Emma? Is that right? Thank you. Sorry.
I think we're definitely looking for other partnerships that are similar. We've learned so much from working with Jordan's, and we're also working with M&S. We're looking to work more closely with Leafmark and look at how we can support Leaf, I think, to do the development that they're looking to do to create, move in the direction perhaps of more regenerative agriculture that will include wildlife. And as we do that, we will hopefully put ourselves in a much better position to be working much more broadly than we have been to date.
Thank you, Emma. I mean, just to say, one of the things we've been really trying to do over the last couple of years is really sort of explore how, as the Wildlife Trust, we will always be a federation of 46 independent, locally run wildlife trusts, but working together how we can really deliver things at scale, because our scale is extraordinary now. We're the 7th largest landholder in Britain as the Wildlife Trusts. As I always say, and I've been quoted this morning, we've got more nature reserves than McDonald's has got restaurants, in fact 1,000 more. We have 3,700 staff. And we have 920,000 members, which is, at the moment, it's quite fun to say that's 2 to 3 times the size of the largest political party in this country, and 10 times the number of people that voted for Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. So there's huge opportunities for us to really leverage that scale and offer some joined up national programmes delivered by the independent trust, but actually to try and deliver at scale, and that's what we're looking at doing in a whole number of areas, including land advice. So it's been great to have this conversation today. So please give a big thank you to our brilliant panel. It was Lucinda Langton from M&S. It's of course Chloe Edwards from Herts and Middlesex, Anne Sawbridge from Jordan's Cereals, and Helen as well, Helen Bailey from Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire Wildlife Trust. Great panel. Thank you very much. Great discussion here at Groundswell this afternoon. Hasn't it been lovely sitting here with the breeze coming through as well? Much better than one of those horrible, stuffy conference centres. This is the way to do conferences, isn't it, and festivals. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.